The trading house on Velkin Station was buried beneath layers of waste processing and forgotten tech vaults, hidden under the hum of smuggler docking rings and the drifting stench of rusted metal. Inside, the heat was oppressive despite the recycled air to many bodies pressed together with anticipation crackling between them. The lights were deliberately dimmed, leaving most of the crowd shrouded in shadow while the stage remained harshly illuminated. Dex Corin leaned against a cracked support beam in the back, hood drawn up, arms crossed over his chest. He hadn't come for this spectacle. He needed spare power cells, a new cooling system for the Wanderer's failing navigation core, and perhaps a strong drink to wash away another day's worth of regrets. But the noise had pulled him in the laughter that carried an edge of cruelty, the kind of sound that made his skin crawl. Now he stood in the middle of it all, jaw clenched, watching a ceremony disguised as entertainment. On stage, a handler in ceremonial robes strutted beneath golden spotlights, his voice booming through the chamber with the practiced flair of someone who'd performed this ritual far too many times. Esteemed members of the cartels, honored guests of the outer territories, the man announced with a theatrical gesture toward a figure in the front row. Let us celebrate our guest of honor tonight, Admiral Voss, whose campaign on Theta Prime has brought 12 cities under control and delivered 43 resistance leaders to the consortium. A victory for order, prosperity, and our shared interests. Applause erupted, forced and heavy, fueled by drink and the promise of entertainment. Dex didn't clap. His eyes were already on the edge of the stage where two guards pulled open the access doors. What emerged wasn't quite human in the way most understood it. She was tall and willowy, graceful even in her stillness, with smooth lavender skin that shimmered faintly under the lights. Her hair, a cascade of long azure strands that moved like liquid silk, hung around her face in tangled waves. She didn't speak, didn't move unless directed. Her arms remained folded neatly in front of her, chin down, eyes fixed on the floor, but the silence that fell when she entered was different from before. The crowd stared. The handler's grin widened. Behold, he said, circling her slowly, Unit 77, strain Zephyrian, bloodbred and conditioned on Nexus Prime under full behavioral protocols. No verbal functions enabled, compliance statute 12 certified. He paused, letting the words sink in. That means she is legally classified as non-sentient property under galactic law, merely a biologically enhanced organism, emotionally compliant and fully transferable as chattel, a companion creature, as the trade calls them. Laughter rose. Again, coarse and ugly. Dex's fists curled inside his coat. He'd heard the term before during those long years of border conflicts and brutal campaigns, but this was something else entirely. She doesn't weep, the handler added proudly. They corrected that defect. The Zephyrian didn't blink, didn't flinch, not even when someone in the audience called out, "Will she resist?" No, Admiral Voss, the handler replied smoothly. She doesn't do anything unless instructed to. The Admiral stood now, massive and scarred, decorations stitched to his uniform, his augmented eyes scanning the girl as if assessing cargo weight. Let's see her move. The handler gestured to one of the guards, who tapped a control device. The Zephyrian woman took a step forward, perfect posture, even gait. Her body had been programmed for elegance, and yet Dex's eyes narrowed. There, just beneath the curtain of hair on the left side of her neck, was a faint geometric mark, not cosmetic, traditional, a Zephyrian clan sigil. They were forbidden across most consortium-controlled systems. Only one kind of person wore theirs openly. Anymore. She remembers. Dex didn't think his pulse surged. On the surface, he didn't move. He simply watched, cataloging exits, security positions, guard rotations, counting them all. The handler turned back toward the crowd. And now, to present her formally our gift to the Admiral in recognition of his exceptional military achievements. Applause thundered. Dex took one quiet step forward. She was being given away. Not auctioned, not even bargained for, just handed over like a bottle of rare wine. As the handler led her toward the Admiral, the security drones hovered in perfect synchronization, one reaching to scan the Admiral's identification tag to finalize the transfer. That's when Dex struck. He moved with the precision of a soldier, and the speed of a man who'd done this before. His right hand snapped into his coat, drawing the plasma pistol low and fast. His first shot took out the nearest drone stabilizer. It spun and crashed into the platform in a burst of sparks, gasps, screams, confusion. He vaulted up the side steps. The second drone turned toward him, reacting to slowly. Dex ducked under its arc and slammed a magnetic disruptor against its base, then kicked it into the crowd. It exploded in a shower of disrupted gravity waves. The handler turned, stunned. What Dex silenced him with one clean punch. He reached her, then the Zephyrian, Unit 77. She hadn't moved, not once, just stood still, watching the chaos unfold, like it was happening to someone else. Can you run? He asked. No answer. Right. Doesn't matter. He grabbed her wrist gently, but she recoiled, not with fear of him, but something deeper. Her body trembled like she'd just broken a rule no one could forgive. A word escaped her lips, so soft he nearly missed it. Lyra. Dex froze, not from the word, but the sound of it. A language that hadn't been spoken aloud since Zephyr fell. They'd tried to erase her, and failed. Behind them, alarms shrieked. Security doors began to slam down. Move, he shouted, pulling her after him. The nearest corridor was already sealing. He slipped his arm under hers, lifting her bodily and sprinting. The last few meters, the door hissed, closed on their heels, catching the hem of his coat. He twisted, ripped free, and kept going. Pursuit alarms triggered consortium signals, not planetary. That meant termination orders were now active. They reached the docking bay where the Wanderer was moored, Bay 15. Of course, the outer blast gate was already cycling into lockdown. He cursed and dropped her behind a crate. Stay down. He sprinted to the wall terminal and jammed a bypass spike into the panel, manually overriding the consortium's gate authority. Sparks flew. The door ground halfway open, then jammed. Naturally, bootfalls echoed down the corridor behind them. He grabbed a pry bar from the nearby tool rack and wedged it into the gate's bottom lip, straining with everything he had. The door groaned, then gave just enough. Go, he shouted to her. Now. She didn't move at first. Then slowly, uncertainly, she crawled through the narrow gap. Her azure hair snagged on the jagged edge, but she didn't cry out, didn't flinch. She was inside. Dex dove through behind her and slammed the emergency seal. Then he activated the Wanderer's manual takeoff, bypassing all clearance codes. The engines roared to life, coughing black smoke before the internal stabilizers engaged. They lifted off seconds before the base security teams arrived. One shot grazed the hull, another bounced off the shields, but they were already gone screaming. Out into black space, silence fell in the cabin once they cleared the atmosphere. The stars stretched out like frozen fire ahead of them. The Zephyrian sat near the door, knees drawn up, hands pressed flat against her thighs. She didn't cry, she couldn't, but she was watching him now. Not like before, not like an object trained to read movements, but like someone trying to understand why. He sat across from her, letting the silence breathe. He should have let it go. He knew that. It wasn't his fight, wasn't his war. Not anymore. She reminded you, didn't she? A little girl's scream buried under rubble on Zephyr Prime. A promise he never got to keep. Damn it, he whispered, rubbing a hand over his face. He looked at her again, lavender skin, azure hair, and that faint tattoo still barely visible under her jawline. She was watching him, not with gratitude, not with trust, just quiet disbelief. You're not a reward, he said softly. You're not a thing. She didn't respond, but her eyes didn't drop either. He stood, walked to the navigation console, and locked their route into the deep void off-grid, away from consortium lanes. He didn't know where they were going yet, but he knew one thing for certain. He'd just burned whatever was left of his anonymity to steal a woman the galaxy had forgotten. And for the first time in years, Dex Corrin didn't feel lost. He felt like he'd finally chosen something worth losing everything for. The Wanderer drifted through the dark between stars, far from consortium lanes and broadcast routes, its aging hull humming with the slow, methodical breath of quiet machinery. Outside there was only the endless black, no beacons, no chatter, no war. Inside, the silence felt heavier. Dex Corrin stood at the edge of the corridor that led to the cargo bay, staring down at the motionless figure seated against the wall. The Zephyrian woman, Unit 77, though he already hated thinking of her that way, hadn't moved since they left orbit. She sat with her knees drawn up, hands resting on her thighs, her posture perfect, her eyes fixed on a blank point in space that might as well have been a million miles away. She hadn't asked where they were going, hadn't asked anything at all. He leaned against the wall, rubbed his temple. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by exhaustion and a slow, gnawing uncertainty. He'd acted on instinct again, same as always. That part of him hadn't changed, no matter how far he ran. He couldn't keep looking at her like she was a problem he needed to solve. She wasn't. She was a person. That truth shouldn't have felt like a revelation. But after what he'd seen at the auction, what the crowd had cheered for, it landed in his chest with unexpected weight. He took a breath, pushed off the wall, and stepped into the bay. "I've got some food," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Not much, rations mostly. Could warm something up." No response. She didn't even blink. He crouched beside her but didn't touch her, careful to stay just outside her reach. Her skin shimmered slightly in the soft amber light, lavender tones shifting like the surface of deep water. Her hair long, azure, and tangled, curled loosely around her shoulders like vines left too long in the wind. There was a smudge of dried blood just above her eyebrow, not from the escape. Old, unattended. "Okay," he said quietly. "That's fine. I'll leave it nearby." He stood, crossed to the wall console, and tapped in the galley override. A few minutes later, a tray descended with warm protein cubes, steamed grain, and rehydrated fruit. Not much, but real food. Nothing synthesized. He placed it gently on the floor near her, close enough for her to reach, but not so close she'd feel trapped by it. She didn't move. He sat on the floor across from her, keeping his distance, waiting. Nothing. Then, barely perceptible, her fingers twitched. She didn't look at the tray, but her eyes dropped slightly, then lifted again. "It's not a test," he said. "I'm not going to punish you for anything, or expect anything. You can eat it or not. You can rest or not." Still no reply, but that flicker of hesitation, that pause, it was something. He watched her for a while, then leaned back against the bulkhead. For a long time, he said nothing. He didn't even look at her, just stared up at the metal ceiling, his voice quiet when it finally came. "I was stationed on Zephyr during the evacuation," he said. 15 years ago. Command pulled us out, early civilians, still on the ground. They told me to board the transport or be left behind." He swallowed. "I boarded." The words hung in the air like metal, scraping metal. She didn't respond. He hadn't expected her to. "You remind me of someone," he added. Still silence, but her body had shifted barely, but enough that her posture no longer looked placed. Her spine relaxed, her shoulders lowered a sliver. A breath escaped her lips. Not obedience, not reflex. Relief. She hadn't been punished for staying still. That was the first new lesson. When he stood again, she didn't flinch. Progress. He turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. "I'm Dex Corin," he said, not turning back. "This is my ship. No one else is aboard. No one else is coming." Still, she said nothing. But as he left the room, she reached out slowly and touched one of the fruit pieces on the tray. She didn't eat it, just picked it up, studied it like it was a weapon or a trap. Then, after a long, deliberate moment, she placed it gently back on the plate. She was testing him now. The next morning, the ship's interior lights adjusted to the cycle. Dex had programmed low amber, simulating dawn. It wasn't much, but it gave the wanderer some sense of rhythm, something living. She was still seated in the bay, but she'd shifted. Her back was against the wall now, and she'd used the blanket to cover her legs. When Dex approached, she didn't look away. Her gaze didn't challenge him, but it met his directly for the first time. He knelt again, this time more slowly. "I need to set a course soon. I can keep us off the grid, but it won't last forever." Still nothing, but there was awareness behind her expression now. She was processing. "I don't know what they did to you," he said, his tone measured. "But I know what they called you. That's not a name." A pause. Her lips parted ever so slightly, then closed again. He hesitated, then reached into his jacket and took out a small diagnostic scanner, no bigger than a handheld tool. He held it up where she could see it. "I just want to check for implants," he said, tracking nodes. "Nothing invasive. You can watch me do it on myself first, if it helps." Still, she didn't move, but her eyes followed his hands as he scanned his own neck, collarbone, forearm. The device blinked blue each time. No heat, no pain. He lowered it, held it steady, and waited. She leaned forward, not much, but enough. When the scan began, it hummed gently. No alert, no signal. But one anomaly appeared, just beneath her left shoulder blade, deep enough to miss a standard sweep. Meant to stay buried, Silent tracker, Dex muttered. Low level, but persistent. We'll have to burn it out. Her head tilted. He raised a hand. I won't do it now, but I will get it out. And when we do, they won't be able to find you again. At that, a flicker passed over her face. Not relief, not yet, but something smaller. Hope, maybe. He stood. I'll give you some space. As he walked back toward the cockpit, something caught his attention, a faint whisper, so soft he almost missed it. He turned slowly. She wasn't looking at him. Her head was bowed again, but she had spoken. Just one word. A whisper of a whisper. Lyra. He didn't know what it meant, but she'd said it like it mattered. And maybe, in time, she'd tell him why. For now, it was enough. He returned to the cockpit, set the Wanderer's course into deep drift, and leaned back in the pilot's chair. The stars slipped past in silence. He should have felt trapped, or burdened. Instead, he exhaled long and quiet, and whispered the only truth that still made sense. You're not a reward. You're not a job. You're just a person who's still alive. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only reason he needed. The hum of the ship was different now, quieter somehow, less mechanical, more alive. Dex Corin couldn't explain it, not in any way that made sense, but since bringing her aboard, since whispering that name Lyra into the silence of the Wanderers. Walls. Something in the ship felt changed, like the air carried weight, like the walls listened, or maybe that was just his own pulse finally slowing. He stood in the Wanderer's maintenance corridor, half lit by strips of flickering amber panels. Tools scattered across the bench beside him. He'd been pretending to reroute the waste recycler for the last hour. Truth was, the system didn't need the work. He just wasn't ready to face her again. Not after what she'd said. Not after she'd said anything at all. Lyra. She had repeated it, quiet, tentative, but real. Her voice, cracked and fragile, had found the word and given it back to him. It still echoed in his memory, and despite everything, he didn't want to break the moment by returning too soon. He set the tool down with a metallic clink and pushed himself off the wall, rubbing his hands together out of habit more than need. He turned toward the cargo deck, walking slow, not because he was afraid, but because he didn't want to rush whatever this was becoming. She had changed position again. That alone was worth noting. Lyra now sat with her back angled against the supply wall, the blanket wrapped around her legs, her gaze tilted slightly upward toward the small viewport that looked out into the stars. Her azure hair, tangled but soft-looking in the low light, shifted with each slow breath. She hadn't heard him enter. Or if she had, she didn't react. That was new too. Before, every footstep had made her shrink in on herself. Every sound brought a flinch, a bracing. Now nothing. He crossed halfway into the room and paused. I brought you something, he said, voice even. She turned toward him, just enough that her eyes met his. That alone made the breath catch in his throat, not because she looked at him, but because she meant to. She was choosing to meet his eyes. That had never happened before. He knelt slowly, showing her what he held, a slim datapad. Not consortium-coded, not a diagnostic tool, just something simple. His. I used to keep field notes on this, back during my time in the outer frontier, he explained, offering it forward. Sketches, logs, maps, sometimes just things I didn't want to forget. She didn't take it, but her eyes followed it. I thought maybe he hesitated, then adjusted. If you wanted to see something real, something that isn't a cell or a lab. Still, she was silent, but he didn't push. He placed the pad gently on the floor within reach, then sat opposite her. After a long moment, she reached forward, lifted the device, and let her fingers hover over the surface. The screen came alive at her touch. Images hand-drawn and unfinished. A jungle world half destroyed by orbital fire. A portrait of a young boy with wide, curious eyes. A schematic of a place labeled Haven Station, long since lost. She scrolled, slow and deliberate. Then she stopped. The image was of a tree, not one from any human colony. A tall, crystal-veined structure with long, sweeping limbs that caught the light and refracted colors. She tapped the screen gently. You know it? He asked. Her throat moved. She closed her eyes briefly, as if searching for something buried beneath. Years of silence. Then, Lyra, she whispered. Before the smoke, before the fire. Dex's breath caught. He'd expected recognition, maybe even emotion, but not words. Not like this. He nodded slowly. Is that where you were born? She hesitated, then shook her head. Not born, but it is home. Her voice was soft, hoarse, as if every word still fought through a wall of broken memory, but she was speaking, choosing to. He didn't move, didn't even blink, too fast, just sat there, and let the quiet wrap around them again. Lyra lowered the pad to her lap and stared at it a moment longer. Then, almost as an afterthought, she glanced at him. Why did you take me? The question landed like a drop of ice water between them. He didn't answer right away. He could have given her a dozen reasons: the cruelty of the crowd, the handler's voice, the words companion creature cutting into his ears like a brand. But none of that was the whole truth. So instead, he gave her what he had. Because I looked at you, he said slowly. And for a second, I saw someone I left behind. Someone I couldn't save. A silence settled again, but this one was heavier, sharper. She tilted her head, studying him in that quiet, alien way of hers. You thought I was her. No, he said quickly. No, you're not her. I know that. He trailed off, then exhaled. You were the first thing in a long time that made me feel something besides guilt. He didn't expect her to respond. She didn't, but something in her posture softened, and then she surprised him again. You gave me a name, she said. He nodded. Why? Lyra? He blinked, then smiled a little sad. It was the name of a singer from old Earth. My mother had a recording, just one. Said her voice could stop a war. Said it was the only thing that made her father cry. Lyra tilted her head again. Did it stop a war? Dex smiled. No, but it stopped me. The first time I heard it, I forgot I was in a war zone. Forgot what side I was on. Just listened. She didn't say anything for a while. Then, I don't know if I can be that. You don't have to be, he said. You just have to be you. That's enough. She looked down, not in shame this time, in thought. Then she whispered, more to herself than him. Lyra, not testing the name, becoming it. He watched her, heart tight. And then the alert sounded, a soft chime, low priority, but it sliced through the stillness like a blade. Dex stood instantly and crossed to the wall panel. His fingers danced over the interface, eyes narrowing, proximity alert. No direct lock, but a ship had passed through their sector, fast, silent, military grade. His jaw tightened. Problem? She asked. He turned. She was on her feet now, barefoot, fragile looking, but centered, grounded, ready. He nodded once. Could be nothing. Could be a scout ship. But they came close. She stepped forward. They're looking for me. The certainty in her voice was chilling. He didn't argue. We've still got that tracker buried in your shoulder, he said. Even dormant. It might be pinging at low frequency. They could have triangulated a partial echo. Lyra's expression didn't change, but her arms wrapped tighter around herself. We'll remove it, he said quickly. Soon. She nodded. We need to change course, he muttered, heading toward the cockpit. Burn off into the dead zone. Scramble the trajectory. It'll buy us a few days at least. She followed him, not because he told her to, because she wanted to. He noticed. Once, in the cockpit, Dex slid into the pilot's chair and began rerouting their path. The Wanderer groaned as its old systems adjusted to the sudden shift, stars bending slightly as the navigation predicted a narrow window through the debris field of the dead zone. Lyra stood behind him, one hand braced lightly on the console edge. Her eyes tracked the movement of the stars, the shift in vectors. You know how to read those? He asked, surprised. She hesitated, then nodded. They taught us navigation, not to fly, just so we could understand when we were being sold. The words were delivered without bitterness, but they still cracked something open in him. He said nothing. After the new course locked in, Dex stood and turned to her. Tomorrow, we're getting that tracker out. It won't be clean, and it'll hurt. But once it's gone, they can't trace you again. She didn't flinch. Instead, she asked, You've done this before. His voice came quiet. Too many times, and then something strange happened. She reached out slow, unsure, and let her fingers brush his sleeve. Not command, not reflex, touch. He froze. Let her do it. Let her choose. When she pulled back, there was a look in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Not fear, not obedience, trust. Real, tentative, and hard-won. And for the first time since Zephyr, Dex felt it in himself too. He wasn't just keeping her safe. He was letting her live, and maybe, just maybe, learning how to live again himself. The stars outside the Wanderer were sharp and motionless, like frozen embers in a cold, windless sky. But inside, everything pulsed with quiet urgency. Dex moved quickly through the medbay, setting out the sterilizer pack, portable cauterizer, and neural suppression gel on the tray beside the table. His jaw was tight, his breath clipped not because of fear, but because he knew what he was about to do and what it would take. Removing a deep body tracker wasn't complicated. It was personal, it was invasive, and it always brought something up from beneath the surface: pain, memory, a silence that broke open with screams, even if no one ever spoke a word. Lyra stood in the doorway, wrapped in the ship's emergency thermal blanket. Her bare feet were silent against the floor. Her azure hair hung loose around her shoulders now, slightly cleaner after Dex had filtered the hygiene module to something less harsh. He'd been careful with everything: no sudden touches, no closed doors behind her, just space, light, options, and now, the only option was forward. Her eyes drifted to the tray, then to the table, then to him. "You sure it's in the left shoulder blade?" she asked, voice raspier than the day before, but steadier. He nodded. "It's an old consortium model, passive transmitter, doesn't pulse unless pinged directly, but if we're inside a certain radius of their patrol grid, they'll catch the signature eventually." Lyra's arms tightened around her midsection, and her chin dropped. "I remember when they put it in," she said. "The light was red, the room cold. They didn't explain what it was. They just said I was ready." Dex looked at her for a long moment, then slowly motioned to the table. "You don't have to lie down. You can sit or lean. I'll adjust." She nodded once and stepped forward. Each movement was deliberate, almost ritualistic, not with fear, but with an old precision born from conditioning she hadn't yet unlearned. When she finally turned her back to him and lowered the blanket from her shoulders, he saw it just beneath the curve of her left shoulder blade, slightly raised, pale against the lavender shimmer of her skin. A small triangle-shaped scar. The skin around it looked altered, not damaged, but refined, engineered, and just below that, a mark he hadn't seen clearly before: a fine-lined geometric sigil inked into the skin, almost like lace. It shimmered faintly in gold and deep azure under the room's sterile light. It was intricate and purposeful, nothing like the crude ownership brands he'd seen burned into others. "What is it?" he asked, careful not to touch her. "A clan mark," she said softly. "Zephyrians didn't write names the way humans do. We carried them in patterns worn on the skin, so they couldn't be stolen. This one was my mother's." Dex felt something catch in his throat. "You remember her?" "I remember her voice," Lyra said, "and her scent like firefruit and stormwood. She used to hum while brushing my hair." He nodded, crouching beside the tray to load the extraction probe. He tried to keep his voice steady. "I've never heard of anyone surviving with their clan mark intact. She burned herself to keep it hidden," Lyra said. "Fused it beneath layers of dermal code." She glanced back at him. "She said if I ever escaped, I should remember who I was, even if no one else did." Dex didn't answer. He didn't trust his voice not to shake. Lyra turned back to face the wall. "Do it." He applied the suppression gel first, working around the scar. She didn't flinch. The gel numbed the nerves, but not the memory. That was never part of the design. He activated the microblade, guiding it in slowly, carefully. "You were in the war," Lyra said suddenly, her voice distant. "You left someone behind." Dex's hands stilled for a moment before he resumed. "A girl, not unlike you. Zephyrian, not a soldier, just a child caught in the middle. We were told the evac zone had to shrink: too much resistance, not enough ships." I argued. "Command shut the hatch in my face." Lyra said nothing, but her breath hitched. "I still hear her sometimes," he said. "Her voice. I don't even know her name. And now you've given me one," she whispered. Dex didn't respond. The device pinged as it locked onto the tracker. He slid the extractor forward and snapped the node from its subdermal slot. The implant gave a faint buzz as its internal battery discharged and died. Lyra exhaled hard, her knees trembling slightly. He caught her elbow, not a grip, just a support. She leaned into it, just a little. He placed the dead tracker into a sealed container and snapped it shut. "It's done," he said. Lyra turned, blinking slowly. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. She never cried. They had fixed that. He helped her into the chair beside the med station. She sat quietly, arms wrapped around herself, and stared at the container, now holding the thing that had made her a commodity. "Burn it," she said. Dex nodded, walked to the disposal chamber, and dropped the case in. The chamber hissed once, then glowed white hot, reducing the implant to ash and memory. When he turned back, Lyra was watching him. "I thought you'd smell like anger," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Most men I met owners, handlers they carried anger on their skin. It was always burning, even when they smiled. You don't have that." He looked away. "I don't think I have much of anything left." Lyra stood, still weak but holding herself tall. "You gave me something. I don't know what to do with it yet, but I know it's real." Their eyes met again. And then, as if on cue, the console overhead pinged incoming transmission, unregistered encryption. Dex crossed the room into strides, pulled up the signal. The message was short, fragmented burst format, but the header tag made his blood go cold. Nexus Protocol 3. Cargo lost. Locate and retrieve. Classified priority. Consortium tracking signature. They knew she was gone, and they were mobilizing. "Time to move," he said. Lyra didn't ask where. She just stepped beside him, steady now, not clinging, not obeying. Standing with him, he angled the Wanderer into a new course, punching in deep drift coordinates toward the Erebus Belt, a region of unregulated asteroid fields, old mining wrecks, and dead colonies. Not a place to hide forever, but enough to buy them time. As the ship shifted into acceleration, Lyra moved to the viewport again. She watched the stars streak past, arms loose at her sides, hair flowing like strands of seaweed in a current. Then she said something Dex didn't understand. "Kethra Salayan," he glanced at her. "What does that mean?" She hesitated, then, a phrase from before, from the old songs. "It means I choose my own sky." He let the words settle in the quiet between them. She hadn't chosen to be taken, hadn't chosen to be broken. But now she was choosing something. Even if it was only a name, a sky, a silence she could own. And for Dex Corin, that was enough. For now, Talon's reach was barely holding together. From orbit, it looked like a rusted gear lost in the dark, wedged into the orbit of a gas giant, its outer hull cracked and patched with scavenged plating. The port's beacon blinked weakly in old Federation code, no formal docking instructions, no customs sweep. That meant there was no government here, no consortium flag flying, no law except the kind made on the fly and enforced with iron. Dex had seen places like it before, and Lyra had survived in them. As the Wanderer locked onto a mooring clamp, the interior lights dimmed, the ship adjusting to station gravity. The soft shudder beneath their feet felt like the ship exhaling reluctantly, giving itself up to something it couldn't trust. Lyra stood beside the airlock, adjusting the deep gray scarf draped around her shoulders. It wasn't a disguise, it was armor, chosen not forced. Her posture was still, but her presence wasn't empty the way it had been days ago. Now there was weight in how she stood, awareness. "I can stay here," she said. Dex paused at the control panel. "You don't have to prove anything." "I'm not," she said simply. "But you shouldn't walk in there alone. A man like you, flying a nameless freighter with nothing to trade but silence. You'll draw more eyes without me than with." He looked at her. "You know what people will think. They've thought worse before." He didn't answer, but she saw it, his jaw tightening, not at her, but at the world that had made her say it so plainly. "All right," he said at last. "Stay close. No sudden moves. And if anything feels wrong, we walk." No hesitation. Lyra nodded once. "Deal." The airlock hissed open, and the stench of metal, sweat, and recycled air poured in. The corridor beyond flickered with faulty lights and exposed cables. Voices echoed in the distance, traders, smugglers, off-duty security officers talking in low, territorial tones. The language here wasn't spoken in words, it lived in posture, in glances, in silence. They walked side by side, Dex in his old leather jacket, pistol holstered but visible. Lyra followed half a step behind, her gaze lowered but her senses sharp. She didn't act like prey anymore. She acted like a shadow that had learned to follow its own outline. They passed through the market levels quickly. Most vendors barely looked up, used to the kinds of people who came through who didn't ask questions and paid in untraceable currency. But one man looked too long, not at Dex, at her. Lyra didn't flinch, but she remembered. She remembered that kind of look, clinical, assessing, not lustful, not curious, just measuring, like she was a product, a scan, a barcode, and a memory. She moved a little closer to Dex, just enough that her shoulder brushed his. He didn't react, but he changed his pace, guiding her toward the first vendor selling water purifiers and med gel packs. You get anything better than black market scrubbers? Dex asked the merchant, a thick-armed woman with synthetic eyes. She grunted. Not for your price range. Dex tossed a chip onto the table. Try me. The haggling began, half a game, half a threat. Lyra stayed quiet, but her eyes scanned the market. A courier in consortium gray stepped out from a side corridor, paused, and scanned the crowd. His posture was to straight, his coat to new, his weapon to clean, and his gaze sharp, unfocused, landed briefly on her, then again longer. Lyra stiffened. She leaned in toward Dex, the man behind the red canopy. Right shoulder. He's tagged. Dex didn't look immediately, just placed a second chip on the table. We're done here, he said calmly. He picked up the pack of supplies and turned. Lyra was already moving. They didn't run, that would draw attention. But their steps quickened down one corridor, left through a maintenance shaft, past a broken lift. The courier didn't follow immediately, but Lyra knew better. The cum band in his ear. She whispered. Old consortium model. Direct link. He's not here for freight. Then he's here for you. No, she said. He's here for us. Dex keyed in their dock access. The Wanderer blinked green, docked, sealed, ready. But when they reached the hatchway, the overhead lights flickered once, then twice, then cut to emergency red. Lyra spun. There, jamming internal power, short range, trying to stall us or pin us in. Dex cursed under his breath. He drew his pistol, checked the chamber. Let's finish this fast. The first shot rang out before they reached the door. A silent pulse from a plasma rifle grazed the bulkhead beside Lyra's head. She ducked low. Dex returned fire, forcing the attacker into cover. Two more figures emerged from the far end of the corridor, armored in matte gray combat suits. Not consortium soldiers, contractors. The kind used when plausible deniability was required. Lyra didn't freeze. She moved. She grabbed a loose pipe from the wall, heavy, corroded, and threw it at the emergency light above the corridor. It shattered in a burst of sparks, casting half the hall in shadow. Dex used the flicker to flank left. Lyra ducked right. Another shot. Screams from marketgoers behind them. Chaos now. She darted forward, slid low, swept a leg. One attacker went down hard, his rifle skidding across the floor. Before he could rise, Lyra brought her elbow down against his throat. He didn't move again. Dex fired two more shots, one hitting armor, the other striking a vent just above the second attacker's head. Steam burst out, blinding him. They ran. The Wanderer's ramp was already descending, triggered remotely. They reached it, breath ragged. Lyra stumbled slightly. Dex caught her arm and pulled her inside just as the last pulse blast slammed into the ship's outer hull. The ramp closed, lock engaged. The Wanderer screamed to life. Inside, lights surged back to full. Systems synced, engines powered. Dex jumped into the pilot seat, fingers flying. Lyra collapsed into the co-chair, blood trickling down one arm from a glancing shot she hadn't even felt. The ship tore free from the mooring clamps, slicing through the hangar's atmospheric seal with a screech of vented pressure. Out in open space, 3 small interceptors peeled off from the station, already locking onto their heat signature. Tell me we've got countermeasures, Lyra said, voice tight. We've got 2. Dex pulled hard left, diving toward the planet's upper cloud band. And one of them's Faith? She laughed, actually laughed. Short, dry, surprised. Then let's use both. Dex launched the first flare burst, dodging upward. The interceptors split formation. One got too close and collided with its own friendly fire, bursting into a ball of flame. Make that one countermeasure left, he muttered. Lyra leaned forward. I can mask RM's signature temporarily, but I need you to give me access to the nav panel. He did. Her fingers flew, entering commands, rerouting secondary systems to overload the signal bleed from the reactor. The Wanderer flickered. The stars twisted. And just like that, they were gone from the scanners. 20 minutes later, they drifted silent through the ice field of a minor moon, camouflaged behind a glacial fragment the size of a cruiser. Only then did either of them breathe. Dex turned to her. You all right? She glanced at her arm. I've had worse. He looked at her, really looked. She was bleeding, shaking slightly, but she wasn't small anymore, wasn't silent. She was alive, and in that moment, more herself than she'd ever been. You saved my life, he said. Lyra turned, her voice quiet. Would you still have saved mine? She asked. If I hadn't fought back? The question hit hard to direct to true. Yes, he said. She watched him. Then I believe you. He reached out, took her hand. She didn't hesitate. The warmth of her skin against his was more than just comfort. It was trust. It was earned, and as the wanderer drifted through the frozen dark, hidden in the quiet between stars, Dex Corin knew one thing with absolute clarity. They weren't running anymore. They were fighting their way forward. Together, the ice field hung like shattered glass in the dark, hundreds of drifting fragments catching the light of a distant dying star. The wanderer nestled between two frozen masses, engines quiet, power reduced to minimal output. They were invisible to all but the most persistent hunters, and for now, the galaxy was silent again. Inside the ship, the air was still not dead. Just waiting. Dex moved through the corridor with slow, measured steps, a medkit in one hand, a blanket in the other. His knuckles were bruised from the fight. The adrenaline had faded. What remained was exhaustion and the raw, pulsing awareness that she had fought for him, not out of programming, not fear, not orders. She had made a choice. He found her in the mess, seated on the bench along the wall, her injured arm cradled against her chest, half wrapped in gauze. Her azure hair was damp with sweat, clinging to her neck, and her breathing was shallow but steady. She looked up as he entered. "I was going to finish that," she said softly, nodding at the bandages. "I know," he said, setting the kit down beside her. "But I wanted to." Lyra didn't argue. He knelt, careful not to crowd her, and gently unwrapped the makeshift dressing. The wound was shallow, a glancing burn from a plasma round, but the skin was angry and swollen, still healing. He applied the salve slowly, his fingers steady, always watching her face for any sign of pain. She didn't flinch. "You should be resting," he said. "So should you," she replied. He smirked. "Touch." He secured the fresh bandage, then reached for the blanket and draped it over her shoulders. For a moment, neither of them moved. "Why did you let me come with you?" she asked suddenly. Dex looked up. "Because you said you wanted to." "That's not an answer." He leaned back, resting against the table across from her, hands clasped loosely between his knees. "Because I saw what you are," he said. "Not what they made you, not what they called you." She tilted her head. "And what's that?" He hesitated, then answered honestly. "Brave, smart, capable, and free, even when you didn't know it yet." Lyra lowered her gaze, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked overwhelmed, not afraid, just full of emotion she hadn't named yet. "They tried to take that from me," she whispered. "All of it." "I know." They almost succeeded. Dex moved slowly, reaching out to take her hand. This time, she didn't just accept the touch, she closed her fingers around his, deliberately, gently. "I almost forgot who I was," she said. He met her eyes. "Then remind me." Lyra searched his face. "Why do you keep asking me to come back when I've barely arrived?" "Because you're not a passenger anymore." She looked down at their joined hands. "I don't know what I am." "You're Lyra," he said. "That's enough." Her breath caught slightly, and in that breath, something shifted. A wall inside her, the one that had braced against everything, even kindness, began to soften. She moved closer. Their shoulders brushed. Neither pulled away. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But when she looked at him again, her eyes were full of something wordless, curious, searching. "I've never kissed anyone," she said. Dex blinked. He hadn't expected the words, but he didn't laugh, didn't tease. He only asked, "Do you want to?" Lyra nodded slowly. "I think I do." He didn't close the space between them. He let her do it. She leaned in hesitantly, like someone stepping into water for the first time after years in the cold. Her lips brushed his soft, uncertain, then again. The second time wasn't hesitant. It was real, warm. When she finally pulled back, her face lingered near his, her breath mixed with his, and her eyes held his like gravity. "I didn't know it would feel like that," she whispered. "Like what?" "Safe." He smiled, small but whole. "Then, let's keep it that way." They sat like that for a long time, no more words, no more running. Just two people in the quiet aftermath of survival, holding the warmth between them like a fragile star. Later that night, Dex couldn't sleep. He stood alone in the cockpit, watching the slow drift of the ice outside. His mind was racing, not with fear, but with awareness. He had let someone in, and not just anyone. Her. The message from the unified resistance still sat in the buffer. Q. He hadn't answered. He hadn't deleted it either. But the longer he stared at the empty screen, the more he understood. They weren't calling him to serve again. They were calling to use him again. And this time, there was someone else at risk. Lyra entered the cockpit quietly, wrapped in the same blanket. Her feet were bare, her steps soundless. She said nothing, just stepped beside him, gaze fixed on the stars. "You're thinking too loudly," she said. He smiled. "Sorry." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You haven't answered it." "No, will you?" He was quiet for a long time. "I don't know." Lyra nodded. "Whatever you decide. You won't go alone." He looked down at her. "You'd follow me into that?" "I'd walk beside you," she said. "Not behind. Not under. Beside." He felt something in his chest break open and settle all at once. For years, he'd wandered through space, trying to forget who he was. Now, for the first time, he remembered. "And it didn't hurt, you know," he said softly. "There was a time I thought I'd never matter to anyone again." She turned to him. "You do." And she kissed him again, not uncertain this time, but with quiet, steady conviction, like a vow, not to save each other, but to live together. No longer broken, no longer owned. Free and whole, the Wanderer hung weightless at the edge of the ice field, its hull dark, systems running quiet as a whisper. No patrols, no signals, just the cold silence of space wrapped around the ship like a blanket of stars. Inside, everything had stilled. It had been hours since Lyra kissed him, hours since she'd leaned into his chest, murmured "You matter," and meant it. Neither of them had said much after that. They didn't need to. Words had done their part. Now it was the space between them that spoke loudest, still warm, unbroken. Dex sat in the cockpit, elbows on his knees, staring at the screen in front of him. The message from the unified resistance was still there, a blinking code waiting for a response. "Captain Corin, signal confirmed, response requested, priority status." Personal.it had been looping quietly for 40 hours. They weren't broadcasting to the wider networks. That told him everything. This wasn't a rescue call. This was personal. He reached for the screen, then paused as footsteps approached behind him. Lyra. She was barefoot again, but this time not out of habit. She had always moved like a whisper, but now it wasn't because she wanted to disappear. Now she moved like someone who belonged wherever she walked. She carried 2 mugs of something warm, his own blend of synth root tea. She set one down beside him, then slid into the chair across from him and tucked her legs beneath her. "You haven't slept," she said softly. He gave a tired smile. "Didn't want to miss the excitement." She glanced at the screen. "Same message?" He nodded. "Same ghosts?" Lyra sipped her tea, then carefully. "Is it from someone you knew?" "I think so." He leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. "The signal's old, the kind used in covert recovery operations. Someone high level, trusted. Whoever sent it. They're not just trying to find me. They're trying to make sure no one else finds me first." Lyra set her mug down. "Then why haven't you answered?" He met her gaze. "Because I'm not that man anymore." She didn't look away. "I don't wear the uniform. I don't take the oaths. I don't follow their orders. Not after Zephyr. Not after what they made me leave behind." Lyra tilted her head. "Then maybe you're exactly who they need now." Dex was silent. The idea stirred something in him, not duty. Something older, hope. But it was Lyra's voice that anchored him again. "You said once," she continued, "that you saw someone in me who made you feel again. Who brought you back." "I did." "Then let me say it, Dex. You brought me back." He watched her carefully. Her eyes didn't waver. "I was a shell," she said. "I existed. I obeyed. I didn't think about tomorrow or yesterday. Just endured. Until you." She stood and crossed the small space between them. "I didn't just survive because you rescued me," she said. "I lived because you stayed." He opened his mouth, but the words got caught somewhere between breath and thought, and then she said it soft, clear, no hesitation. "I love you." The words sat between them like gravity, undeniable, real. Dex's chest ached, not with pain, but with the weight of something breaking open inside him. Something that had been locked away for too long. "I don't deserve that," he whispered. Lyra shook her head. "No one deserves love. It's not a reward. It's a choice." She reached out, resting her hand against his heart. "And I choose you." He took her hand in both of his, kissed her palm, and held it there. "I love you too," he said. "I think I have for longer than I realized." Her eyes softened. "I knew." They leaned into each other, then foreheads touching, breath mingling. No rush, no need, just stillness. And that kiss, it wasn't hesitant this time. It wasn't careful. It was true, not an end, a beginning. They spent the next day preparing the ship, not for escape, but for a journey. Dex loaded the Wanderer's database with encrypted flight paths Lyra had uncovered from stolen consortium navigation logs, hidden routes through forgotten sectors, war-ravaged systems, collapsed trade lanes, dead zones, places where no one was supposed to survive, places where people like Lyra might still be waiting to be found. Their new mission wasn't just about answering a call. It was about answering to themselves. Lyra reconfigured the ship's secondary systems. She had learned faster than even Dex expected. She wasn't just healing. She was reclaiming everything they'd stolen: language, purpose, control. By the time they were ready to launch, Dex activated the CUM panel and entered the response code. The screen flickered. A moment later, a voice came through, crackling, strained, but unmistakably human. "Corin, you bastard. You're alive." Dex exhaled. "Hello, Marcus." Lyra stood beside him, arms folded, eyes locked on the display. "Where the hell have you been?" the voice demanded. "Off-grid," Dex said. "You still cleaning up the mess you walked away from?" "We've been monitoring rumors. Consortium activity near the outer reach. Unmarked transfers of sentient class assets." "It's worse than you thought." Dex met Lyra's eyes. "I know," he said. "I need you back," Marcus said. "Not in uniform. Just in this fight." Dex hesitated, then looked at Lyra. She nodded once. "You've got me," Dex said. "But I'm not coming alone." Pause. "Understood. Coordinates incoming." The screen went dark. Lyra stepped forward, brushing her fingers across his. "So this is the part where we save the galaxy." He smiled. "No, this is the part where we burn their cages." She grinned. "I like our version better. They launched that night, no fanfare, no goodbyes. Just two people, one once called a ghost, the other called an object, heading into the dark with light in their hands. Whatever waited ahead, they would face it together. As equals, as partners, as loved." And for the first time in her life, Lyra didn't brace herself for the future. She walked into it freely, because now she had a name, she had a voice, and she had someone who would never let her be a possession again. Not a prize, not a weapon, not a whisper, just Lyra. And that was more than enough.